Good morning. Welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder. This is BRN AM for Thursday, March 21st, 2024. At our top story today, retirement insecurity, growing concerns about America's retirement readiness. And joining me now to discuss this and a lot more, John Lowell is a partner with October 3 Consulting, and Dan Doonan is the executive director of the National Institute on Retirement Security. Dan, John, great to see you again. Thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Thanks for having us, Jeff. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to join you.
Yeah, Dan, it's been a while since we've caught up, but we're certainly glad to have you. And Dan, I want to start with you because National Institute on Retirement Security just released a survey, and it's Americans' views on retirement. And needless to say, it's not really retirement security, it's retirement insecurity in 2024.
Yeah, that's right. This is a project we go back to every other year and ask Americans how they feel about retirement. And, you know, there's a lot of pessimism out there in terms of how Americans view our progress in getting ready for retirement. We see 81% feel like the nation has a retirement crisis. And, you know, the numbers are a little better when you ask people about their situation. But of course, we know about half of workers aren't in a retirement plan at work. And that when you look at medians, the sort of average worker is always well behind in terms of what they need for a really secure retirement.
Yeah, I mean, it's and I want to get into the numbers in a few seconds, Dan, because I think we need to unpack this even more great detail. But John, it's always great to see you, and I always appreciate your insight. And I want to ask you, what are employers that read the NERS report? So they read this report and they see this insecurity. I mean, it's entitled Retirement Insecurity for 2024. What are they thinking? Because you're in those meetings as an actuary, as a consultant. So what are they thinking when they see a report like this? What are they thinking with their own plan?
Dan, I'm sorry, Jeff, you're absolutely right about that.
And Jeff, you can call me whatever you want.
You'll probably do the same with me, but in any event, you are absolutely right. Employers who read this, or even employers who don't read it, frankly, are very concerned. They know their employees are under a lot of financial stress, and part of that is very much the mentality as an employee, can I ever retire? What will it be like? And when their employees are under that kind of stress, the employers know that they're getting much less productivity from those employees. So they read data like this. It probably, in a lot of cases, confirms their worst fears. And they're asking questions like, what can we do about that? And are there solutions that are really affordable for us because we do have a business to run? And are they sustainable? Can we put something in for 1 year and then we're going to have to kill it? Or are we going to have to go back and, make changes? But in a perfect world, we can implement something that will really last us for the long haul.
Yeah, and Dan, I want to come back to you because it's always about the reaction of the employer and the reaction of the employee. And Americans in the survey, I should say, it's not just yours, it's NERS. They express strong support for pensions. And we're going to talk to John in a second. IBM restarted its pension. There seems to be almost a renaissance, if you will. It's almost 17th century Italy, the Renaissance, the rebirth of the pension. So there's a lot of support here for the pension and the pension-like payments that people have come to rely on.
Yeah, and when you think about how pensions worked, someone was hired into a job, they did their job, and employers contributed. They set up every year with the help of folks like John. They take a look. Where are we now? What should we do to make sure that the plan is on track? And when you look at defined contribution plans, how many of us really log in each year, take stock, and reevaluate and adjust your contributions? So
it's low. It's low. Definitely low.
Right. And I'll confess, I don't always do that myself. But pensions are very user friendly, and we see in our polling, we ask people, do you feel that all workers should have a pension? And 82% felt they should. So I think people understand this move away from pensions to a savings-based system where it asks so much of individuals has really made retirement more challenging.
Yeah. John, and coming back to you, and then we'll go to a commercial break. I mean, I'm thinking of the fiduciaries around that table, and whether it's a DC plan or a DB plan, trying to educate people. First of all, it's not about stupidity or lack of knowledge. It's just, people just have a lot going on. And how can they be expected to manage their accounts on a year by year or a quarterly or a day by, well, hopefully it's not day to day basis. And so it puts a lot of pressure, as you're saying, on the plan sponsor, on the employer. But John, how do they think about pension? So what does the word pension mean to the employer? Are they thinking about it in the traditional DB sense? Or are they thinking about it in terms of cash balance or retirement income out of any type of retirement plan?
That's really a great question, Jeff. And I think it varies a lot from company to company, sponsor to sponsor, and industry to industry. But for those of us who have been in this business for long enough, I mean, I certainly remember the 1980s when there really were lots of pensions, and those companies that had them for quite a while had no thoughts of ever getting rid of them. That was something they did for their employees. And then we saw that start to change, and pensions gradually began to disappear, fade away, get frozen, get terminated. And, there are different ways of measuring the cost of a pension. But one of the things that finance executives really don't like is volatility. They like to know how predictable their costs are. And that's one of the things that I've heard over the years has really caused a lot of companies to move away from pensions. So if we look at it still, those 1980s style pensions, which as a participant, as somebody who might be getting a pension from one of those plans, I have a great affinity for. I understand why a CFO says, I can't handle 1 year having no contribution that I can make, and the next year being required to make a contribution of 10% of payroll. I don't know how to plan for that. I don't know how to budget for it. So they're coming to people like us and they're asking for solutions. Can you give me a pension solution that really is or does produce predictable costs? And when we can go to them with answers and say, yes, we can give you predictable costs. Tell us what you're willing to budget and we can produce designs that get you there. They suddenly have a whole lot more interest. And there are a lot of organizations that are looking at certainly reopening frozen pension plans from that standpoint, but with a very different look and feel than they had 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, whatever the case may be.
Yeah. Well, John, Dan, as I said, I need to take a very quick break. When we come back, we're going to pick up the conversation. How do we turn retirement insecurity to security? You're going to want to stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms, especially for the smaller businesses? I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network. Welcome back. We're joined this morning by John Lowell of October 3 Consulting and Dan Doonan of the National Institute on Retirement Security. Dan, John, thanks so much for staying with us this morning.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks.
And I do have to confess that I wish I had a pension. That's just my own personal wish. Dan, you had a follow-up point that you wanted to make before we continue the back and forth. Go ahead and make that point. It was something John had said.
Yeah, I think what John was saying was really important. I think a lot of times when you have conversations with people that maybe haven't been involved in the pension industry, there's an assumption that all plans kind of work the same way, they're designed and funded the same way. And there's been an evolution in plan design. DB is really a framework that allows a lot of customization. So, after the Great Recession, there's a lot of conversations about public plans. It was a very public conversation. And while a lot of that dialogue was DB versus DC, what really happened across the states and local governments was a lot more customization. So it wasn't A or B, it was how do we make this work in a way that suits employees and employers?
Yeah, a really good point. And Dan, just to kind of a question that I had in between during the commercial break, and I'm thinking about policymakers. We had Secure 1.0, Secure 2.0. The main overarching theme is coverage, getting more people into the system and more people covered, but also the corollary to that is being able to decumulate and take money out. So you got to be able to be covered, but you got to have money at the end of retirement. So what do policymakers, this is kind of a I don't know, softball pie in the sky, but if you were Dan, the head of chair of the Senate Finance Committee, maybe someday, you never know, what policy should our policymakers be thinking about to further improve and go from retirement insecurity to security?
Yeah, I think the importance of thinking of retirement in terms of income, not wealth. There are some folks who are very wealthy, and that's great. But for most people, this is about having income that can top up their Social Security benefit and keep them at a reasonable standard of living, keep them in their homes so they can afford the necessities in life. And we in our opinion research, we asked individuals, if you had $100,000 nest egg, how much income do you think you could get annually in retirement with that? Retiring at age 67. And we had 29% say respond $20,000 or more, and over 20% also guessing $10,000 or more. Now, if you think about the 4% rule, you can have 4% plus inflation each year thereafter as being a spend down, like where we start this conversation. There's a lot of people that are guessing really high in terms of what their nest egg will provide. So, in my point of view, pensions solved this. Spend down is a very tricky problem for individuals. All these risks are unpooled. Long-term care, how long you live. Pensions solved that. But I also think to the extent that the 401k industry is trying to solve post-retirement, I think that's a positive too.
Yeah, and John, I want to come back to you. I mean, Dan made some really good points. And one area I was looking at the survey, John, I want to ask you about. Americans, to Dan's point, are worried about long-term care. And we know in the last few years of life in retirement, healthcare through the roof. I mean, I think Fidelity had it recently. I don't want to just promote them, but I think it was like somewhere neighborhood of like $200,000 to $300,000 for healthcare. And those long-term care costs at the end of life, very expensive. And this is something that employers, they need to be thinking about, because if you hang on for a long time and you continue to work, you're not kind of letting other people in the workforce kind of move up the food chain and get into other more senior positions.
Yeah, I very much agree with that, Jeff. But there's somewhat of a different three-legged stool here. Instead of the one we usually talk about when we're talking about retirement and pensions, I'm thinking the three legs here are kind of the employee or the worker, if you prefer, the employer, and the government. And the government plays a very major role in this, in that, yes, as an employer, you want to do what's right for your business. Good employers also want to do what's right for their employees. But if the government doesn't make it palatable, if it becomes too onerous to offer the benefit the employer would really like to offer, it becomes challenging. So just like Dan, I mean, I've had some discussions, with policymakers and staff, and they are looking for ideas. They do understand that this is a really tough challenge that we have right now because of the point we've gotten to. And they'll ask me questions like, what do we need to do to get more employers to offer pension plans? And I think that's a wonderful question. I think it's really important. But one of the things they can't do, in my opinion, is to change the rules every year or every 2 years or every 3 years, because every time you change the rules, you change the dynamic. And at that point, either you have a CFO pulling their hair out because the finances of it go all over the place, or you have an HR head pulling their hair out because the way they treat their employees is very different and they have to communicate things differently. So, in my view, those three legs of the stool kind of need to get together. And then you need people like Dan and me who are really looking at it as third or fourth parties, but have the best interests of everybody at heart, in my opinion, to let us help to craft those new policies that will really be sustainable for multiple generations to come.
Yeah, and Dan, I want to get your reaction to that, but also if you might add, I'm thinking about having a benefit that attracts workers, and right now there is a very tight labor market. I know that we get all different types of labor data, but it's a tight labor market. So attracting and also retaining, you need the best benefit possible. So if I'm choosing employer A, B, or C, one of the things, and I'm an older guy, so I'm in my 50s, I'm going to look at the health benefits, I'm going to look at the retirement benefits, and I'm going to try to figure out for employer A, B, or C, which one am I better off at?
Yeah, I think you're right. The unemployment rate is very low. The conversation has shifted in our space as well about to focus more on retention than costs. So we see that as being really important. And we actually looked in the state of Alaska, they moved away from offering a pension. And say the same workers working, the same schools, police departments, fire departments, they're seeing different behavior amongst those in the DC plan than the DB plan. So pensions are a good retention tool. That's originally what they were designed to be. And I was asked the other day, well, if workers are going to jump around jobs like they do today, why offer a pension? And, my response was really, we used to incentivize careers and we saw longer careers. And as we moved away from that to more of a cash and carry type of retirement benefit, the incentive to stay on that job and maybe not take another job for a couple percent more has really diminished. So I think, people respond to incentives, and pensions establish this culture where, if I work here, I'm going to be in a good place in retirement.
Yeah, and John, I'll finish with you because I think Dan makes a really good point. And I would also add the day we moved to daily valuation on these 401k plans, that was, you started getting people into the day trading, but that's a whole nother, we're not going to go there. That's a whole nother story, a whole nother show. But John, Dan makes a really good point. I mean, police, firefighter, emergency personnel, they retire early. They don't retire at age 65. They retire maybe at 55 because that's a hard job. Let's face it, it's physically hard. So you want to be able to attract those workers, especially in the public sector. A pension can and will and does help you attract them.
That's very true. And as you pointed out, certainly in those high physical demand, high risk jobs that you see a lot of in the public sector, but in the private sector as well, in the corporate sector, if you go to a head of HR right now and ask them what their biggest challenge is, every survey that I've seen for a number of years will reflect some combination of attracting employees and the right ones, retaining the right ones, And also workforce management, being able to get the older workers to retire at reasonable ages, but on their own terms. If somebody is 75 years old and they still can't afford to retire, that's a problem for the employee. It's probably also a problem for the employer, because most 75-year-olds that I know are not that level of motivated anymore to do the job that they were motivated to do earlier on. It's not trying to be discriminatory against the older workers. It's trying to provide for them so that they can enjoy retirement. But not only are HR heads making that their top priority, I've seen surveys over the last 2 or 3 years that those same things, attracting, retaining, and managing the workforce, have become the single top priority for CFOs in a lot of industries, the finance people, and it's because they realize the cost of unwanted turnover and having to use a word that I don't really believe is a word, but having to reskill existing employees so that you can keep your workforce moving it's incredibly high. But going back to the original theme, we really believe, and I think the NERS data proves this to a very large extent, that pensions are in fact a great attraction and retention and workforce management device. But it's not necessarily the pensions of the 1980s. The workforce has evolved, pensions have evolved with them. We just need to bring the two of them together in a better way. And I think we can do that.
Yeah, well, Dan, certainly great research. It's thought-provoking. And John, excellent analysis. Gentlemen, we're going to have to leave it there. Great to see you both. Thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to having you back on the program again very soon.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
And that wraps up this episode of BRN AM. Have a topic of interest? Someone you think we should talk to? Then drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the latest information on retirement income, lifestyle, technology, wellness, and so much more, all in one place, check out today's edition of our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse. Want to search our archives or check out our latest content? Well, then visit our website. Hey, we're back again tomorrow with another edition of BRN AM. We'll have a very special guest and, of course, another important topic. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes. Now is your opportunity to co-create content around any topic on the First Lifestyle and Wellness Network. Reach a global audience through our platform and co-own exclusive branded content. All of our programs are available on demand and also as audio-only podcasts, so you can take us on the go. Broadcast Retirement Network, available anytime, anywhere, and on any device.